with your background in strength and conditioning and all your different certifications, functional movement screening, like a lot of the language that you've developed studying and getting certified in those different areas can really go over the heads of athletes, coaches. What have you done to be able to have a conversation that they understand in terms of like when you're working with an athlete, like here are the areas that we need to focus on and here's why, without them like glazing over in terms of not understanding what you're saying?
Yeah, I have to admit I was really bad at that in the beginning as I was absorbing all this information and just almost like regurgitating like just big words. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
this sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had to work with kids. Like I spend most of my time working with high school athletes and middle school athletes. And so trying to take what I'm learning and then even get it to what a 16-year-old can conceptualize and understand was very, like, I think tedious in the beginning, but it helped me kind of learn a different way to speak. Like if we're talking about, hey, I need you to have more thoracic rotation, because in order to have thoracic rotation, like it allows you to get maybe a little bit better shoulder flexion and a little bit better, sequencing and hip separation and, creating a little bit more whip through the torque. Like I could lose everybody there. Or I could say like, hey, if your upper back just moves a little bit more, I could probably increase your arm speed. And here's why, because your arm will go, gravity will help it come down a little bit faster. And then if I let your hips move first and then gravity and your torso rotates, then we can do some really amazing things. So, I've had to learn the hard way through my own conversations with my kids, but I get to practice that almost daily with them, so that when I get to college coaches, it's not too overwhelming. And then having some constant conversations with some friends of mine on a regular basis. But it's like kind of seeing what and then like pulling yourself out of it a little bit and going back to the softball coach and saying, okay, 10 years ago, would I understand what the heck this was? Or 5 years ago, how would I explain this to myself? During the process, and then certainly I still like get down rabbit holes and with coaches, and I'm sure I lose them on certain things, but I've gotten a little bit better at that. And then really the best way to kind of connect two worlds is sitting down and watching video, and slowing a video down and saying, okay, what do you see here? Tell me what you see. Okay, now I'm going to get up and show you. It's really funny on Zoom calls when you're trying to like stand up and like move and show people, but I'm going to physically put my body in a position to demonstrate to you what I'm speaking about, or have a coach try a little bit of an exercise and you're like, oh, okay, now I'm kind of on the same page of what you're saying. But yeah, I think that's one of the number one biggest issues in college athletics is this disconnect in language and communication.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And on the same page. And then even in terms of not just like maybe training or movements, but even on goals, like in understanding what you want to get out of an athlete. A college pitching coach may want to improve somebody's rise ball by X number of spin rates or inches or velocity. That may not mean anything to a strength coach. They've never been a softball player or maybe a baseball player. Like, what do you mean improve the rise ball? How am I improving? Does she throw it? Okay. Like in what context do I want it better? Right. Because with strength coaches, like, hey, I need you to get better at your deadlift. They measure that in either speed of bar or weight on the bar. So there's very like absolute measurements that you can measure performance in a gym. It's very easy. It's very objective. Right. And when we talk about it in softball, sometimes I think our improvements are more subjective. And that's maybe a little bit of that disconnect to strength coaches is objective world, subjective, not what does a real rise ball look like? What does it not look like? I think that's probably the first foundation problem is pitching coaches, skill coaches, hitting coaches kind of see where they want to go with an athlete, but it may not always be as easy to measure as we think. Granted we have Blast and Rapsodo now, but
yeah,
it's kind of sometimes more subjective, and then trying to communicate that to your strength coach and saying like, this is her goal. I need her to get better at a rise ball. And that strength coach is like, okay.
I don't know what that means.
I can get her better at her trap bar deadlift. as I sit in both worlds, like, hey, let's talk about that. Let's be very honest, and maybe it comes down to she can't stay underneath the ball long enough. And we know that on the pitching coach side, we know that we need to do that. And on the strength coach side, well, I can see why now she can't stay on the ball long enough, because her back hip has really poor mobility, and she needs that back hip to be able to internally rotate a little bit better. And if I improve that, maybe I can get you to where you want to go. And that's probably been the most cool thing, is to see the excitement on the faces of coaches and strength coaches when they now have a purpose.
Yeah.
The coaches are really smart, and they've got a toolbox of lots of things and ATCs. And when they understand a little bit better the context, they're like, oh, hey, I've got 4 hip mobility drills that I really want to try with this athlete. I think that might really help. And now they're bought in, and now they're going back to the pitching coach like, hey, I'm going to do this. Like, let me know if she feels anything different, or, if this works. And then all of a sudden the athlete gets pulled into that conversation in a good way. Like, hey, we're targeting your internal rotation with these hip mobility drills because I know you need to get a little bit better rise ball. And I think if you get a little bit better hip movement through it, it'll help you stay on the ball. And now the athlete's like, oh, cool. Like, what I'm doing in practice and what I'm doing in the weight room are all kind of meeting together and trying to help me. So that's been the fun part, is seeing excitement on some strength coaches' faces as they realize that they have a lot more tools that they at their disposal than maybe they were initially thinking about.